The Golden State Warriors, as currently constructed, is not good enough to win the championship this year. And so, the natural course of action now is for the Warriors to go after a trade, go after a player. The question is who? And what kind of piece do the Warriors actually need to help solve the situation that they're in right now? Which is that they're one of the worst teams in the league defensively. They're ranked 24th on defense. And that's just not good enough. If you're in the bottom 15 of the league defensively, you're not really a serious team. You're not really vying for contention. And the Warriors have always relied on defense to back them up when the going gets tough. Aside from the KD years, they never really had a legitimate secondary option outside of Steph Curry. 2 years ago when they won the championship, it was interchangeable between a guy like Andrew Wiggins and Klay Thompson. But neither of them were necessarily definitive second options, especially when it came to the playoffs. And when you think about their first championship back in 14 and 15, it was the exact same thing. It was mostly a Steph Curry carry job in terms of scoring and offensive output and things like this. And then you had Klay Thompson as a distant secondary scorer. When you look at what these guys average in the finals, it's super clear. The next best scorer, essentially outside of Steph Curry, who averaged 26, was Andre Iguodala, who averaged between 15 and 16 points. So while the Warriors can go the formula of having a definitive secondary option or even a borderline first option when you think about what KD was for the Warriors have always relied on defense. And the biggest reason the Warriors defense has not worked is mostly because of Steve Kerr's decision making. Steve has a major problem. He has a tendency to go smaller than necessary. He goes extra small. He did that in the FIBA competition when he thought that Josh Hart was best suited to play the center position against the world. And then Josh Hart fouled out, and then he played Mikal Bridges at center. So these are the crazy things that Steve Kerr seems to like to do. He thinks everybody can play the role of a Draymond Green. And that's just simply not true. Draymond Green is one of the most unique defenders in the history of the NBA. He's very Dennis Rodman-like. And Dennis Rodmans and Draymond Greens don't grow on trees. But Steve Kerr somehow thinks so. It's very disrespectful to Draymond to think that everybody who is like 6'6", 6'7", can just go to the center spot and just play that role. And anybody and everybody who is 6'5" and over can somehow go to the power forward and play that position. Now, I don't want to get too much into that because if you've seen some of my previous videos, then you would know that I've already covered this topic in great detail. So here's the bottom line. The Warriors have a Steve Kerr tax issue. Because Steve Kerr is their coach and they refuse to get rid of him, and then on top of that, they refuse to go and get a defensive assistant, which they've needed since they lost Mike Brown 2 years ago. I mean, you can see very clearly. 2 years ago when they won the championship, they were the best team defensively, and it wasn't even close. Mike Brown leaves the situation, goes over to the Kings. Next thing you know, the Warriors are ranked 18th on defense last year, and then this year, they're all the way down to 24th. It's a complete and utter joke. No wonder the Warriors keep blowing one game after another. If you look at how many games that they've lost this season by a single bucket, it's insane. And the stuff is happening repeatedly over and over and over because the Warriors continue to do these nonsensical things from a defensive standpoint that is going to hurt them throughout the course of a game. The perfect example, 3 games ago, the Warriors played against the Sacramento Kings, and Steve Kerr, for whatever reason, nobody questioned it. Not a single media member asked him after the game why this happened. Just completely ignored. Trayce Jackson-Davis was completely out of the equation against the Sacramento Kings. The night before that, Trayce played a chunk of the fourth quarter minutes at center, and he helped the Warriors blow out the Atlanta Hawks. And that's a rarity. The Warriors don't get to say very often that they blew out a team, and the starters could afford to rest late in the fourth quarter because the game was already out of reach. Now, this has been my contention all along, that once Draymond came back from his suspension and Steve Kerr finally learned through that time that Trayce Jackson-Davis is actually a super necessary player for the Warriors to be more successful until they get a viable piece out of a trade. The logic is quite simple. The Warriors have been playing Dario Saric at the 5 all season long. And that has been a complete and utter disaster for their defense. whatever it is that that guy provides offensively is not worth it for the Warriors because he gives up too much momentum to the other team because he's at the 5 and he can't stop anybody coming to the paint, coming to the rim. And when a team doesn't have any rim protection whatsoever, a guy who can't even just be solid from a positional standpoint, well then that team's defense is constantly going to be vulnerable. The 5 is the center spot. It is the anchoring spot, and it is the single most important defensive position in the game of basketball. Trace is a rim protector. I don't know his per 36 numbers off the top of my head, but it's pretty damn good. It is very, very true center-like. And Steve Kerr was supposed to learn this lesson that Trace should have been in the rotation for the Warriors all along. And instead of learning that lesson, after they blew out the Hawks with Trace in the equation, the very next night, Trace was nowhere to be found. Now, I have a theory as to why this happened. Now, Trace has played the previous 3 games, and in every single one of those games, the refs called something whack on him. Whether it was a false goaltend call, whether it was a false out of bounds call, it happened 3 games in a row where Trace is just like, oh my God, are you serious? This is the worst call ever. I did not foul this guy. I didn't touch that ball out of bounds. Challenge it, please. He's looking at the coaching staff and he's just like, challenge, challenge, challenge. He's just jumping up and down, desperate for a challenge because he knows that he got jobbed by the refs. And the replay showed that he was right every single time. And the first 2 games, Steve did not bother challenging. The 3rd game, Trace did it again, like this, the Hawks game. And you know what? The refs got it wrong, and Trace was right. And they called a false goaltend on him. It was a clear block, clear as day. And instead of giving the Hawks 2 points, those 2 points were taken away because of the challenge. And then the Warriors get down on the other side of the floor. And I believe they hit a 3, which ended up being a 5-point swing. That's a big deal. See, those kinds of things are momentum changers. And it's absolutely important that there's good communication between the coaching staff and the players when the players have a level of certainty about whether something is worth challenging or not. Now, you got to remember that Trayce Jackson-Davis, at the end of the day, is a rookie. And Steve Kerr is, well, Steve Kerr, coach of the Warriors for the last 9 years. I don't think he appreciated being shown up by a rookie 3 straight games in a row. And then, he ends up being right. Trace ends up being right. But he still challenged the coach. And I guess, I don't know. That's the only possible reason that I could think of for why Trace was out of the equation against the Kings. A game in which the Warriors ended up losing by a single point. And I did a whole ass breakdown in the 2nd game of the season when Trace got into the game against the Kings accidentally because Dario Saric got into foul trouble. And he held the Kings, including De'Aaron Fox, including Malik Monk. He held that team to 4 points in a 5-minute span. That gave the Warriors a huge cushion because of his presence on the floor. So at this point, I'm devastated. I just can't fathom how Steve Kerr could think that he could just bench Trace all over again, just like he did in the earlier parts of this season when nothing was working for the Warriors. And I was begging for Trace to be in the rotation. Because if Trace is in rotation and he's the best defensive center that they have on their bench, arguably already better than Looney in a bunch of ways, and you put him at the center spot. And for me personally, I would love to see Draymond and Trace play together. Draymond at power forward and Trace as center, because I think that's a really powerful defensive unit. But even if not, if they were staggered and Draymond played power forward, some center, and then when he's off the floor, Trace is now manning the center spot, that's just more minutes of good defense on the floor for the Warriors. It's not even close. Dario Saric and Trayce Jackson-Davis is worlds apart, different when it comes to their reliability from a defensive standpoint. Trace is just worlds apart, already better than Dario Saric will ever be in his career as a 5. He's not a 5. I don't think he's ever really played the 5. I think Steve is the only one who somehow thinks that it's okay to play a guy who's a 0 on defense at the 5. The other problem that Steve Kerr has is the tendency to go with a 3-guard lineup instead of a 3-forward lineup. And when you go with 3 guards, that includes Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and some combination of Chris Paul, Kojo, Pods. They're just too small. I will never understand why Steve Kerr would ever think that defensively it's okay to put out a lineup of Steph Curry, Corey Joseph, and Pods at the same time. If you're playing 3 guards at the same time, all 3 of those guards better have some ridiculous attributes and that they are so good that it's worth putting out 3 guys that are 6'4" and under on the floor. Now you have to ask yourself, is Corey Joseph that guy? I think everybody can collectively agree that the answer is no. Even when it's Chris Paul in there instead of Corey Joseph. Now Chris Paul is good, don't get me wrong. He's one of the best point guards ever. However, he's 38 years old. He'll be 39 soon. This year, he will become 39 going into the playoffs. And he's 6 foot. 38-year-old 6-footer next to Steph Curry, who's 35 years old, who's turning 36 in a month. I mean, this is preposterous. It is a horrendous idea. Those two should basically never really share the floor together. And if Steve did these things, maybe it would have worked out differently with a guy like Chris Paul. But it doesn't. The Chris Paul, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson closing lineup is a disaster defensively. It's part of the reason why the Warriors kept blowing these games when Chris Paul was healthy, along with like Wiggins at the 4, Kuminga at the 4, Draymond at the 5, who doesn't have enough help at the 4. So you can see how the Warriors defense has just completely disconnected in this way. Bunch of Dario Saric minutes at the 5, putting Wiggins and Kuminga at the 4 next to Draymond. That's just not strong enough. You have to be stronger defensively. 2 years ago, they had that when they had Otto, who could actually legitimately play the power forward position. He's a tweener, stretch 4 type, but there are those guys that can play that power forward position. They were once upon a time a small forward, and they transitioned up to the power forward spot, so it gives them this multi-positional versatility from a defensive standpoint. Because if they started as a 3, that means they can guard 3s. And if they transition to a 4, that means they can also guard 4s. So that allows them a lot of switchability. They can guard wings. They can guard players that are a little bit bigger. It makes them very versatile. It's not easy to be this kind of player. Some guys are built for it. Some guys are not. Andrew Wiggins is the perfect example. He's not built to play the 4. He is a great 3, and you can even play him at the 2. If he's guarding 2s, that's good news for the Warriors. If he's guarding 4s, that's bad news for the Warriors. Same thing with Kuminga. He should be mostly playing the 3. I mean, I wouldn't even mind playing him at the 2. But he's clearly best suited for the 3. The 4 is a bit much for him. So this is a long-winded way of me explaining what the Warriors need to do in the trade market. Who needs to be some of their primary targets. And I have 4 particular teams that are worth looking into for the Warriors before the trade deadline. Or by the trade deadline. Now that I've given you this background in terms of what is not working for the Warriors and what they actually need, we can kind of get into what pieces would help the Warriors kind of overcome this hump defensively that they've not been able to overcome all season long. And the answer to this is quite simple, actually. It's to take away the toys and the devices from Steve Kerr so that he cannot do these crazy things that he seems to love to do, which is to go 3-guard lineups, 4-guard lineups, Dario Saric at the 5, Kuminga, Wiggins at the 4, Draymond at the 5 without any protection at the 4, nor the 3, nor the 2. I mean, imagine a lineup of Chris Paul, Steph Curry at the 2, Klay Thompson at the 3, Wiggins at the 4, and Draymond at the 5. What protection does he have there? Who's going to help him rebound? Who's going to play help defense at power forward next to Draymond the same way Draymond plays help defense at the power forward spot when he's there? Nobody. Wiggins is not doing that. Sarge is not doing that. Kuminga's not doing that. They're missing that piece. They've been missing it ever since they lost Otto Porter Jr. after they won the championship 2 years ago, and they were never able to replace him. It's crazy to me that the front office still hasn't figured this out. You need a closing stretch 4 if you're the Warriors. That's how they've always managed to win a championship. Whether it was KD, whether it was Harrison Barnes, whether it was Otto Porter Jr. So they need to go back to the root of what has been working for them. They need to go bigger. They need to take away some of these defensive liabilities on the Warriors. That is Dario Saric, Corey Joseph, and Chris Paul. Those are the 3 biggest names that simply have to go. Now, if you can include Klay Thompson in some way in a deal, I would go for that too at this point. Klay Thompson enables the 3-guard lineup stuff, and him next to Steph Curry is just no longer good defensively. Them 2 together on the floor, Klay Thompson does not protect Steph Curry. And as they both get older, it's only going to get worse. And then Klay Thompson wants to get paid a whole bunch of money. Meanwhile, Steph Curry is constantly looking over his shoulder, making sure that Klay is not unhappy, making sure that Klay is getting enough touches and shots while he ends up ignoring his own offense. So really, I just gave you 4 names that are tradable. Kuminga was also in there, and he's not all the way out for me personally because, well, Kuminga's done a lot of developing this season. And from a scoring standpoint, I mean, he's hit a new gear. Draymond has unlocked something out of Kuminga in a way that we haven't really seen before in terms of this level of consistency, this level of confidence, and just his ability to attack in open space provided by Steph Curry. And nobody takes advantage of that space better than Kuminga on this team right now. So Kuminga has kind of played his way into a situation where he could be a spark plug, either off the bench or, in the starting lineup. He's in the starting lineup right now. But if the Warriors want to be great defensively, I think they need to be a little bit bigger. Right now, what they're doing is Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, Jonathan Kuminga, and Draymond. That's just a little bit too small. Kuminga's not a true 4. Draymond is not a long-term 5. And it just could be a lot stronger. So if the Warriors are able to go and get a power forward or a center that really shores up their front court, I'm willing to go Steph Curry, Andrew Wiggins, Jonathan Kuminga, Draymond Green, and a center or a power forward next to Draymond. Okay, so now that we've kind of deciphered what kind of pieces are going to fit the Warriors the best and how to take away Steve Kerr's toys, let's take a look at 4 teams that the Warriors can look to for hopefully a viable trade. Team number 1, the Washington Wizards. Now the Wizards by far have the most intriguing name and one of the bigger names that are still left on the market that is viable for the Warriors, and that's Kyle Kuzma. Kyle Kuzma is 6'9". He's about a 225-30 pounds. He's got close to a 7-foot wingspan. His rebounding is solid. His passing is solid. He can pretty much score everywhere on the floor. It makes the Warriors definitively bigger. They could put him next to Draymond to play power forward. Now Draymond has more help from a rebounding standpoint. And then if you put Kuminga next to him, and then if you put Wiggins next to him, and then you got Steph, I mean, that's a big lineup. And now Steph got a lot of protection. You got Wiggins at the 2, you got Kuminga at the 3, you got Kuzma at the 4, and you got Draymond at the 5. Now, if the Warriors want to try to be ambitious, they can also try to go for Daniel Gafford, who is a center. I think the Warriors at this point might need some help at center, given that Looney is just so inconsistent, unfortunately. I mean, defensively, he's capable against certain teams, against certain matchups. Against a guy like Jokic, he can play pretty decent. Against a guy like Sabonis, he could be pretty decent. But if he ends up on a guy like AD, Chet Holmgren, even a guy like Zubac, Nurkic, Lively, I mean, these are matchups where Looney would struggle from a defensive standpoint because he is undersized. He's 6'9". And then just to make up for that, he's gained a whole bunch of weight that severely limits his mobility. Oh my goodness. If you just take a look at what he was 2 years ago in his contract year, and if you look at how slim he was and how much better he was defensively, I mean, this is just worlds apart different. Loon, I guess, ultimately decided that he needed to pack on more weight so that he can deal with the giants of the league at the center spot. But this has also just diminished his overall ability to defend guys better. Looney had a lot of versatility in terms of staying in front of wings and guards. He had that ability. He no longer has that ability. A guy like De'Aaron Fox will just go right by him. Now, I think there's a path for the Warriors to be able to win even with Looney. But again, if they want to be ambitious and go after Kyle Kuzma and Gafford, that would be a huge win for the Warriors. Now you have a center tandem of Gafford and Trayce Jackson-Davis. That's pretty damn good. And then you get back a guy like Kuzma. I mean, come on. Now there's some complications in terms of being able to trade with the Wizards because Chris Paul cannot really be involved because Chris Paul came from the Wizards to begin with. He cannot be traded back to that team until the end of this season. So the Warriors may have to involve a third team to get that going, or they can try to move off of Klay. Now I messed around with the trade machine a little bit. You can kind of take a look at which ones work from a financial standpoint for both teams involved. So that's idea number 1. Idea number 2, the Brooklyn Nets have 3 players of interest for the Warriors. That is Nicholas Claxton, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Royce O'Neal. Now, how can we get a trade done with this team, with those pieces? Here you go. Let's take a look. And Claxton, really, you would want him for the same reason that you will want a Gafford on the Warriors. To upgrade the center spot. Now you have athleticism, rim protection, some extra scoring, better perimeter defense, connecting that with Draymond. I mean, that would just be killer. We've seen how good the Warriors defense can be when Draymond is paired with an elite center, Andrew Bogut. I mean, for all these years, they've had a great defense even with Looney in there. Imagine if they actually upgrade that center spot with a guy who can play both ends of the floor. That would be Nic Claxton. See, the more centers and power forwards the Warriors have on their roster, the more viable their defensive units become. Because if your best players are at the forward spots, then you're more likely to go with a 3 forward lineup and a 2 guard lineup, and not the other way around. 3 guards and 2 forwards. It makes your defense notably weaker. As for Dorian Finney-Smith and Royce O'Neal, they're both floor spacers. They can both shoot the 3, and they can both guard. They can play multiple positions. They can play the small forward spot. They can play the power forward spot. And this is exactly what the Warriors need. Shoot, if you can get 2 of them, now you really shore up your defense. The Warriors need versatility from a defensive standpoint. They need to go many different directions depending on which team they're facing. So if they're facing a team like the Nuggets, they need a bigger team. They need guys that can withstand the force of the size of that team and be able to match it and not be overly small, not be able to get rebounds, not be able to guard them in the paint. All these things. At the same time, you need two-way players. You need guys that can stretch the floor. You need guys with some versatility. You need guys that can punish you if you leave them alone. This kind of thing. Now, Claxton is an expiring contract. And if the Warriors are able to get somebody like him and then re-sign him for years to come, well, their defense will be excellent for years to come. But more importantly, their defense will get fixed up right away this season. And that's what's needed for the Warriors to make enough noise, get back into the playoff picture, and become a legit threat for title contention this season. Team number 3 is the Utah Jazz. I'm looking at one guy on that team. His name is John Collins. Now, it was reported that John Collins was not happy with his role on the Jazz, and the Jazz were willing to move off of him. This was reported probably about a month ago, and this was while the Jazz were struggling, while they were injured. And since then, the Jazz have gone on a huge run. I think they won like 10 of 11 games at some point recently. But they've also kind of fallen back to earth. And I think John Collins is a super viable player for the Warriors as a stretch forward, if not even be able to play the center spot. He's 6'9", a super legit guy that you can put next to Draymond. He can space the floor with his three-point shooting. He's an elite finisher at the rim. Good rebounder, capable of blocking shots, providing some help defense, and just being able to reliably support a guy like Draymond next to him. So I would kind of look at him as an Otto 2.0 type. He can score better than Otto. He can probably rebound better than Otto. He can shot block better than Otto. I think he's probably not the same kind of playmaker. But again, you can use this guy in a lot of different ways. And if you had a lineup of Draymond, John Collins, Kuminga, Wiggins, and Steph Curry, I think that would be super powerful. Now you have multiple lob options. You have all kinds of size. You have some floor spacing ability. Draymond has been lights out from the three-point line this season. So you got Draymond who's spacing the floor. You got John Collins who's spacing the floor. Kuminga, who is not a great three-point shooter, but he's getting better. He's certainly capable. And the bottom line is that the Warriors would just be so much more athletic across the board. So much more help defensively for Steph Curry to protect him as he gets older. And you finally get that all-rare stretch four the Warriors have desperately needed since 2 years ago. I think John Collins is a fantastic name for the Warriors to consider. Team number 4, and this is going to be the last one, Toronto Raptors. Yes, it is too late on OG Anunoby. I wanted OG Anunoby since last year's deadline. I was willing to move off of whatever it is that they needed. I wanted him for obvious reasons. If the Warriors went and got OG Anunoby last season with the starting lineup that they had and OG entered the equation, I mean, that's just murderer's row of defenders. They would have had GP2, OG, Wiggins, Draymond. I mean, come on. Who's scoring on that team? But obviously, and needless to say, now he belongs to the Knicks and he's tearing it up for their team. Good for him. Good for them. You also had Pascal Siakam, who the Warriors had some level of interest in, but they didn't want to pay for a possible rental. The Pacers swooped in and got him. So now the best two options that were available from the Raptors are gone. The Warriors still need a legitimate 4 that can play next to Draymond to close the game. And they still have some of those guys. They have Thaddeus Young. They have my personal favorite guy, Otto Porter Jr. And I'm going to add Boucher in there just to make the salaries work. Help the Raptors so that the Raptors can help the Warriors. Now, out of all the trades, this is probably the most marginal one. But if you can get back Thaddeus Young and Otto Porter Jr., two guys that can both legitimately play the power forward position, which is something that nobody else outside of Draymond can do on the Warriors, I mean, that's just perfect. Now, between Thaddeus Young and Otto Porter Jr., I think Otto is definitely the better one. We all know that Otto comes with some injury risks, his foot issues, which is why Thaddeus Young would be a really good insurance policy should anything happen to Otto. Now you have a lot of depth at power forward. Now you have a lot of size. Chris Boucher, I don't think the Warriors need to play him. Just like the Raptors don't really play him and hasn't really played him all these years. It is what it is. Sometimes when you need to get something done, you have to help the other team as well. I'm sure the Raptors are really looking forward to get off of Boucher's contract. Again, the only reason I added Boucher into the deal is so that the Warriors can get back two viable pieces that could really help change their season for the better, while taking out some pieces that just don't belong on the Warriors because of the Steve Kerr tax, ultimately. So there you go. 4 teams, 4 viable pieces, and then some, for the Warriors to retain some pieces that will help connect their defense that has been disconnected since last season. It's time for the Warriors to realize what is missing and to shore up their situation so that they can go back to being the dynastic team that they actually are and stop this charade and pretending that things are falling apart. It's only looking like they're falling apart because of some of the pieces on the roster and the way Steve Kerr has been using them. I want Steve Kerr gone. He's completely incompetent, and the dude is just incapable of good adjustments. Without another elite mind by his side. That was Mike Brown all these years. As soon as he lost Mike Brown and all he had was Kenny Atkinson, I mean, we've seen the results the last couple of years. The Warriors front office, if you want to save Steve Kerr from himself, you gotta fix your roster and make sure that you give Steve Kerr no opportunity to do something whack that is going to hurt their defense. And trading for some of these pieces that I mentioned, I have little doubt that it's going to make the Warriors defense so much better. It's all about connectivity for all 48 minutes. If they have that, boy, are they going to look like a different team. Now, if you have some ideas in terms of what the Warriors could go after, what kind of piece is viable for them, please leave them in the comments below. We want this video to blow up. We want good ideas to blow up so that it can, one way or another, reach the ears and eyes of somebody on the Warriors. For the love of God, I'm just trying to help. I watch this team play every single game, and I want to watch a better product. And in my mind, the best way to do that is for the Warriors to go and consider these pieces that were mentioned in this video. Anyway, that's all I got for today. If you come this far and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And if you haven't done so, hit the notification bell, because I'm going to bring you some of the best NBA content in the world, and you don't want to miss it. I promise you. I'm extremely grateful for your time. Thank you for watching. Until next time.